The knock came just after sunset, measured and deliberate, echoing through the quiet hallway of Margaret Hale's modest Virginia home. She paused mid-step, one hand still gripping the back of a wooden chair, her breath catching for reasons she could not explain. No one ever came unannounced anymore. The world outside her door had grown distant over the years. Polite, predictable, yet this knock carried weight. Memory? Something, old and unfinished, pressed against her chest as the autumn light faded beyond the window. Margaret was 72, her silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her movements careful but composed. Her home reflected a life built on endurance family photos, carefully kept books, and one black and white photograph that time had never been allowed to touch. A young American soldier in uniform stared back from the frame, his smile confident, hopeful. Sergeant Thomas Whitaker, declared dead in France in 1944. Killed during World War II. According to the telegram that had shattered her youth and reshaped her future, when she opened the door, the air left her lungs. The man standing on her porch was old, thinner than the boy she remembered, his shoulders curved under invisible weight, his coat hung loosely, his hands trembled, and tears streamed freely down a weathered face. But his eyes, those unmistakable gray eyes, were unchanged. They locked onto hers with devastating familiarity. "Maggie," he said, voice breaking. Hearing her name in his voice collapsed 50 years into nothing. The world tilted and Margaret's knees nearly gave way. Thomas Whitaker cried openly, without shame, as if the war had finally followed him home. He looked 19 and ancient all at once. Margaret could not move. Her mind flooded with memories she had sealed away, letters written under dim lamps, hurried kisses before deployment, promises whispered at a crowded train station. She remembered the day the telegram arrived, the cold formality of the words, the silence that followed. She had buried him, mourned him, and learned how to live in the space he left behind. Bained Thomas. A black sedan idled quietly at the curb. A younger man stepped out, his posture rigid, his expression conflicted. He wore a tailored coat, his presence unmistakably deliberate. He watched the scene with restraint, eyes flicking between Margaret and Thomas, as if guarding a truth too heavy to interrupt. Margaret barely noticed him. Her entire world had narrowed to the man she had loved, lost, and somehow found standing before her. Thomas wiped his face with the sleeve of his coat, his voice barely steady. "I tried to come back," he said. "I never stopped trying." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Margaret's fingers tightened around the doorframe as fear and longing collided inside her. If Thomas had survived World War II, then why had he vanished from her life for half a century? And what truth had followed him here, waiting to finally tear the past wide open? Margaret stepped back, without realizing it, the door still open, the cold evening air slipping into the house as if invited by the past itself. Thomas remained on the porch, frozen, unsure whether crossing the threshold would be forgiveness or intrusion. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence pressed in, heavy with everything they had never been allowed to say. Finally, Margaret turned and walked slowly toward the living room, not looking back, trusting that if he truly belonged there, he would follow. He did. His footsteps were hesitant, almost reverent, as though he feared disturbing a fragile dream. Inside, the house smelled faintly of tea and old books. Thomas's gaze moved carefully across the room until it landed on the photograph. His breath hitched. The young soldier staring back at him felt like a stranger now. "You kept it," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Margaret folded her arms, her voice steady but distant. "I buried you once," she said. "That was all I had left." The younger man entered quietly, closing the door behind him. "I'll wait outside," he offered, respectful, controlled. Thomas shook his head. "No," he said gently. "Stay." Margaret finally looked at the stranger properly. He was in his early 40s, handsome in a restrained way, his eyes carrying concern that went deeper than duty. "This is Daniel," Thomas said. "My son." The word landed like a sudden gust of wind. Margaret's heart stuttered. Son? A life Thomas had lived without her. Daniel met her gaze, something like guilt passing through his expression. "I didn't know about you until recently," he said carefully. Margaret nodded, unsure what hurt more, the years Thomas had lost, or the years she had been erased from. She turned back to Thomas, anger rising beneath her composure. "You let me believe you were dead," she said quietly. "Every day. For 50 years. Thomas's eyes filled again. "I was captured," he confessed. "Declared missing, then presumed dead. When I escaped, everything had changed." He told them about the camp in Eastern Europe, the failed escape attempts, the injury that nearly killed him, above the years after the war, living under another name, bound by classified silence and fear. "I wrote," he said, voice breaking. "They never reached you." Margaret listened, torn between empathy and heartbreak. Each explanation soothed one wound and reopened another. She had built a life around his absence, a marriage that never felt complete, a loneliness she learned to wear like armor. Later that night, after Daniel stepped outside to make a call, Margaret stood by the window, staring into the dark. Thomas watched her from across the room, longing restrained by guilt. He wanted to reach for her, to close the distance, but fear rooted him in place. Margaret finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came back too late," she said. Yet the way her hand trembled betrayed her, and neither of them noticed. Daniel, watching through the glass, realizing this reunion would cost more than any of them were prepared to lose. The night stretched long and restless after Thomas finally retired to the guest room, leaving Margaret alone with the quiet hum of memories that refused to sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, staring at nothing. 50 years of carefully controlled grief had been cracked open in a single evening. She had learned to live without answers, and now they were everywhere to many. Too late. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, whispering like the past, asking to be let in again. Thomas lay awake as well, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. Every sound in the house reminded him of what he had lost and what he had dared to return for. He replayed Margaret's face when she saw him, the shock giving way to something softer, more dangerous. Hope he had sworn to himself not to ask for anything, not forgiveness, not love. Yet the ache in his chest betrayed him. Survival had been easier than this. Coming home was proving to be the hardest battle of his life. The next morning, Daniel found Margaret in the garden, pruning roses with deliberate focus. "You don't owe him anything," he said gently, standing a careful distance away. She didn't look up. "Neither do you," she replied. Daniel hesitated, then spoke the truth he had been carrying. "He never stopped loving you," he said. "Even when he married my mother, even after she died." Margaret's hand stilled. The words cut deep, reopening wounds she hadn't known still bled. "Love isn't enough," she said. "It never was." Later that afternoon, Thomas approached her on the back porch, the space between them charged with restraint. "I won't stay if you ask me to leave," he said quietly. Margaret met his eyes, searching for the boy she once knew inside the man he had become. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after all this time?" Thomas swallowed. "Because I was told you were dying," he admitted. The words hit her harder than anger ever could. She turned away, steadying herself against the railing. A flashback surged uninvited. Margaret at 22, standing on a train platform, gripping Thomas's hands as steam swallowed him whole. He had promised to come back. She had promised to wait. Both promises had been broken by forces beyond them. Back in the present, Thomas stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but he did not touch her. The restraint hurt more than any embrace. "I needed to see you," he said, "even if it destroyed me." That evening, a letter arrived by courier, its seal official, its weight unmistakable. Daniel opened it first, his face draining of color as he read. "Dad," he said slowly, "they're reopening your case?" Thomas froze. Margaret felt a chill settle in her bones. The war they thought had ended was reaching for them again. Whatever truth lay buried in Thomas' past was about to surface, threatening to take him away just as suddenly as he had returned. The letter lay open on the dining table like an unexploded shell, its official seal broken, but its consequences very much alive. Margaret stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching Thomas read the pages again and again, as if repetition might soften their meaning. His hands were steady, but his face was not. Whatever the government had reopened was not ceremonial. It was procedural. legal, dangerous. And suddenly, the fragile miracle of his return felt temporary. "They want testimony," Thomas said at last, his voice low. "Records? Verification." Daniel leaned against the wall, jaw tight. "They're questioning whether you were legally declared dead," he added, "and what that means for everything that followed." Margaret felt her stomach twist. Everything. That word carried too much weight. Marriages, property, pensions, identities. Entire lives built on absence. "So they erase you again?" she asked quietly. Thomas shook his head. "Or they erase to I began to survive." Later that afternoon, Margaret found herself driving without destination, memories blurring with the passing streets. She had buried Thomas once. That burial had given her permission to move forward, to marry, to build a family, to live without waiting by the door. If the government rewrote history now, what did that make her life? A mistake. A lie. She pulled over, gripping the steering wheel as tears finally came, sharp and uncontrollable. Thomas watched her leave through the window, guilt gnawing at him. He had come to see her one last time, not to append her peace. The war had taught him how quickly love could turn into collateral damage. When Daniel returned from a call with the attorney handling the case, his face was grim. "If this goes public," he said, "there will be hearings, press, questions." Thomas closed his eyes. Exposure had always been his greatest fear, not of enemies but of the truth. That evening, rain fell steadily, soaking the streets in silver. Margaret returned home, soaked and shaken, only to find Thomas waiting under the porch light, his coat drenched, his posture humble. "I'll leave," he said before she could speak. "If this threatens your life, I won't stay." The words were noble, practiced, and devastating. Margaret stared at him, anger flaring through the fear. "Don't decide for me," she snapped. "You don't get to disappear again." The rain intensified, blurring the world into shadows. In a moment, neither of them planned, Margaret reached out and grabbed Thomas's wrist, stopping him as he turned away. The contact sent a shock through both of them. He froze. She realized she was trembling. Their faces were inches apart, breath mingling, decades of restraint screaming between them. For a second, it felt like the war, the years, the losses had all vanished. Thomas lifted his free hand slowly, as if asking permission, but stopped short of touching her face. "I love you," he said softly, the words breaking something open at last. Margaret's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Before she could answer, a car pulled up sharply behind them. Daniel stepped out, urgency written across his face. "Dad," he said, "they're coming sooner than expected." And in that moment, Margaret understood this time. The past was not asking politely. It was demanding everything. The headlights vanished down the street, leaving the porch wrapped in silence, broken only by the rain. Margaret stood frozen where she was, her hands still warm from Thomas's wrist, her pulse racing as if she had just crossed an invisible line. Inside the house, the walls felt suddenly too thin to contain what was unfolding. Thomas followed her in without a word, every step heavy with the knowledge that the clock had begun ticking again, just as it had in 1944. Daniel spread documents across the dining table, his movements efficient but tense. "They're sending representatives," he explained. "Military review, federal oversight. They want sworn statements." Margaret listened, arms folded tightly, watching Thomas's face more than the papers. He looked older now than when he had arrived, as if the war had found a way to age him all over again. "You don't have to do this," she said suddenly. "You don't owe them anything." Thomas met her gaze, pain softening his expression. "I owe the truth," he replied, "and I owe it to you." Later that night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She wandered into the living room and found Thomas seated in the dark, staring at the photograph on the wall. "I should have died," he said quietly, not turning around. The words startled her. "Don't say that," she whispered. "Surviving wasn't the hardest part," he continued. "Living while everyone else moved on was." She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, yet neither of them touched. The space between them pulsed with everything unsaid. A memory surfaced: Margaret at 25, standing in her wedding dress, forcing a smile while imagining Thomas's face in the crowd. She had chosen safety over longing, stability over hope. Sitting beside him now, she felt the weight of that choice pressing down on her chest. "I loved my husband," she said softly, "but part of me was always waiting for you to come back." Thomas closed his eyes, absorbing the confession like a wound and a gift at once. The next morning brought confrontation. Daniel, standing by the kitchen counter, finally voiced what he had held back. "If this goes forward," he said, "everything changes. For you, for her." His eyes flicked to Margaret. "People will ask questions about loyalty, about choices." Margaret straightened. "Let them," she said. "I've lived quietly long enough." Thomas watched her, stunned by the strength in her voice. He had returned, expecting rejection, not resolve. As the day wore on, a black government vehicle appeared at the end of the street, unmistakable even from a distance. Margaret felt Thomas tense beside her. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, fragile but certain. Whatever was coming would test them both: truth, judgment, loss, or redemption. And as the car slowly approached the house, Margaret realized that choosing Thomas now might cost her everything she had built. But letting him go again would cost her far more. The men arrived just after noon, their presence announced by clipped footsteps and the quiet authority of uniforms that had not softened with time. Margaret watched from the doorway as Thomas straightened his posture instinctively, shoulders back, chin lifted, the soldier within him answering a call he had never truly left behind. For a moment she saw him not as the man who had shattered her grief by returning, but as the young sergeant who had once walked into history and never officially walked out. Inside, the living room, transformed into an interrogation space, disguised as formality. Papers were laid out, names were confirmed, dates repeated. Thomas answered with precision, but Margaret noticed the subtle tremor in his hands when the questions drifted toward the years unaccounted for. Classified missions, false identities. Silence imposed in the name of national security. Each answer peeled back a layer of survival he had built around himself, exposing wounds that had never been allowed to heal. Margaret sat quietly, her presence unofficial but defiant. When one of the officers suggested she step outside, she refused without raising her voice. "I've waited 50 years, she said. "I'm not leaving now." Thomas's eyes flicked to her, gratitude and fear colliding. He had faced enemy fire with less terror than the thought of her hearing everything. Some truths were harder to survive than war. As the questioning intensified, a name surfaced, one Margaret did not expect. Her late husband. The officer's tone was careful, almost apologetic, as he asked about timelines, marriages, records. Margaret felt the room tilt. The life she had built after Thomas's disappearance was being examined under fluorescent light, dissected as collateral history. Thomas clenched his jaw, guilt flooding his features. She did nothing wrong. A-side fear. She believed I was dead. During a brief recess, Margaret stepped outside onto the back porch, the air cold and grounding. Thomas followed, stopping just short of her. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy with decades of regret. She turned to face him, eyes shining but steady. "Don't apologize for surviving," she replied. Then, softa, apologize for leaving again. The truth hung between them. This process could take him away. Again, when the officers finally departed, the house felt hollowed out. Daniel broke the silence. "There's more," he said quietly. "They're calling a hearing. Public." Margaret's breath caught. Thomas looked at her as if memorizing her face. He reached out, hesitated, then gently brushed his thumb against her knuckles. A touch so light it felt like a promise and a goodbye all at once. That night, as Margaret lay awake listening to the distant sound of a train passing through town, she understood something with terrifying clarity. Loving Thomas had always meant living with uncertainty. War had stolen their youth. Silence had stolen their years. And now, truth threatened to steal their future. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, One thought refused to let go if the world was going to test them again. She would not face it alone this time. The days leading up to the hearing passed in a blur of quiet tension, every moment stretched thin by anticipation. Margaret found herself noticing details she once ignored: the way Thomas lingered in doorways, as if unsure he was allowed to stay, the careful distance he kept, protecting her from rumors before they even existed. At night, they sat across from each other with cups of tea growing cold, speaking of ordinary things while extraordinary fear lived beneath every word. Thomas spent hours with Daniel, reviewing records and reconstructing a life that had been deliberately erased. Each document felt like a confession. Each date carried consequences. Yet what haunted Thomas most was not the hearing itself, but the possibility that Margaret would once again be forced to choose between truth and peace. He had sworn never to put her in that position again, and yet here they were, standing at the edge of it together. One evening, Margaret found Thomas in the garage, staring at an old trunk he had brought with him. Inside were remnants of another lifetime: letters never sent, a folded American flag, a worn photograph of Margaret taken before the war. Her breath caught as she recognized her younger self, smiling without fear. "I carried you with me," Thomas said quietly, "even when I wasn't allowed to exist." Tears slipped down Margaret's cheeks before she could stop them. As she reached for the photograph, Thomas's hand closed gently around her wrist, steadying her. The touch lingered, charged, neither of them pulling away. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of their breathing, the shared gravity of everything they had survived apart. "I don't regret waiting," Margaret whispered. "I regret believing I had to stop loving you." Thomas leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers, restraint trembling between them. The next day brought an unexpected complication. Daniel returned from a meeting with the attorneys, his face tight with concern. "There's another name tied to Dad's disappearance," he said. "A commanding officer who falsified records to protect an operation." Margaret felt a chill. If exposed, that truth could dismantle careers, families, legacies, and if Thomas spoke, he would become the center of a storm he had avoided for half a century. That night, Margaret stood alone in the bedroom, staring at her reflection, confronting a truth she could no longer deny. Loving Thomas meant accepting chaos, judgment, and loss. But denying it had already cost her 50 years. When she stepped into the hallway, Thomas was there, as if summoned by her resolve. She took his hand without hesitation this time, and as their fingers intertwined, neither noticed Daniel watching from the stairs. Realizing that when the hearing came, love would no longer be their only battlefield. The morning of the hearing arrived, wrapped in gray skies and unspoken dread. Margaret dressed slowly, her hands steady, despite the storm inside her chest. She chose a simple navy coat, dignified, deliberate armor against a world that would soon dissect her life. Thomas waited by the door, silent, watching her with an expression that held equal parts awe and sorrow. He had survived war zones with less fear than the thought of walking into that room beside her. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. Cameras flashed. Whispers followed them like shadows. Margaret felt every stare, every unasked question pressing against her spine. Thomas instinctively stepped closer, placing himself between her and the noise, a silent shield. When their hands brushed, he hesitated, then firmly took hers. The contact grounded her. For the first time since his return, she felt seen not as a relic of a scandal, but as a woman choosing her truth. Inside the hearing room, the air was tight with tension and history. Officials sat in rigid rows, papers stacked like weapons. Thomas was sworn in, his voice calm as he recounted the years of captivity, the classified operations, the forced silence that followed. Each sentence stripped away another layer of myth, revealing a man shaped by duty and loss. Margaret listened, heart pounding, as his survival became public fact rather than private miracle. Then the question shifted. Toward her marriage, toward loyalty and morality, and what a woman was expected to do when the dead refused to stay buried. Margaret stood before she was asked. Her voice, when she spoke, did not waver. "I grieved a man declared dead by his country," she said. "I built a life because I was told there was no one to wait for." The room stilled. Even Thomas looked at her, stunned by her strength. A sudden interruption cut through the proceedings. Daniel rose from the back, holding a newly uncovered document. "There's been a mistake," he said firmly. The paper detailed the falsified report, the superior officer who had erased Thomas to protect a covert operation. Murmurs rippled through the room. The truth shifted again, dangerously. Thomas realized that speaking further could destroy lives, innocent ones included. He turned to Margaret, eyes searching hers for guidance he had no right to ask. In that instant, Margaret made her choice. She stepped forward, placing herself beside Thomas, her hand resting on his arm. "Whatever he decides," she said clearly, "he does not face it alone." The declaration echoed louder than any testimony. Thomas swallowed hard, emotion breaking through his composure. The hearing recessed abruptly, tension unresolved, consequences looming. As they were escorted out through a side door, Thomas leaned close and whispered, "I never deserved you." Margaret met his gaze, fierce and unwavering. "You came back," she replied. "That has to count for something." Isso agora, o capítulo 9 com 6 parágrafos e com 520 palavras. Penúltimo capítulo ChatGPT Rotaresta Chapter 9. The days after the hearing unfolded in uneasy suspension, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Margaret returned home to a quiet that felt different now, no longer empty, but uncertain. News reports speculated endlessly, twisting facts into narratives she barely recognized. Friends called with hesitant voices. Some offered support, others offered silence. Thomas stayed mostly indoors, aware that every step outside carried judgment he had not prepared her for. At night, they sat together in the living room, close but restrained, waiting for a verdict that would decide more than legality. Thomas replayed the hearing again and again, haunted by the moment he had nearly spoken the final truth. Exposing the officer would clear his name completely, but it would also unravel families, careers, and a chain of events far larger than himself. He had lived decades under the weight of sacrifice. Now the cost of honesty felt heavier than ever. Margaret sensed the storm inside him, watching the way he stared into space as if still standing on a battlefield. "Whatever you choose," she said softly one evening, "I won't mistake silence for cowardice." Daniel returned with updates, each more complicated than the last. "They're offering a closed resolution," he explained. "No public exposure. Your status officially correct. Benefits restored." Margaret heard what went unspoken. No accountability, no full truth. She turned to Thomas, searching his face. "Is that enough for you?" she asked. He hesitated. "It would let us live quietly?" he said. The word quietly carried temptation and fear. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She wandered into the guest room and found Thomas packing, his movements slow and deliberate. "I don't want to trap you," he said without looking up. "If my presence keeps reopening wounds, I'll leave again." The word struck deeper than anger ever could. Margaret crossed the room and grabbed his wrist, forcing him to face her. "Stop deciding alone," she said, voice breaking. "You don't get to disappear to protect me anymore." Emotion finally overtook restraint. Thomas pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if the world might tear them apart if he loosened his grip. Margaret pressed her face against his chest, tears soaking into his coat. 50 years of longing collapsed into that moment. "I waited my whole life to stop being brave," she whispered. Thomas closed his eyes, heart shattering and healing all at once. He wanted to kiss her, but fear held him back. The next morning, a sealed envelope arrived. The final decision. Margaret watched Thomas open it, her pulse echoing in her ears. His face went pale as he read. "They want my answer," he said quietly. "Public truth or quiet erasure." Margaret stepped closer, placing her hand over his. Outside, the church bells rang in the distance, marking an ordinary day. Inside, Thomas understood with crushing clarity whatever he chose next would define not only his past, but whether love would finally be allowed to survive it. The answer did not come immediately. Thomas stood by the window long after the envelope lay open on the table, the winter light casting his reflection back at him like a stranger he no longer wished to be. For most of his life, survival had meant silence, obedience, carrying the weight alone. But love had changed the rules. When he finally turned to Margaret, his eyes were clear in a way they had not been in decades. "I won't erase myself again," he said quietly. "Not now. Not with you standing here." The hearing reconvened a week later, smaller this time, quieter, but no less heavy. Thomas spoke, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with precision and restraint. He told the truth without spectacle, naming the falsified report, the cost of secrecy, the years stolen by fear disguised as duty. The room listened in silence. Careers would fall, so would lies. But Thomas did not look back. He looked only at Margaret, seated behind him, her gaze steady, unwavering. The outcome was swift. Once the truth surfaced, official records were corrected. Thomas Whitaker was declared alive, honor restored, history amended. The headlines burned briefly, then faded, replaced by the next scandal, the next distraction. What remained was quieter, deeper. On the courthouse steps, Margaret reached for Thomas's hand without hesitation. Cameras clicked, but neither of them flinched. For the first time, they were not hiding from the world or from each other. That evening, back at the house, the silence felt different again. Peaceful, earned. Thomas stood in the doorway of the living room, suddenly unsure. Like a young man waiting for permission, Margaret crossed the space between them and stopped just inches away. "You came back," she said softly, "and you stayed." Thomas lifted a trembling hand to her cheek, reverent, as if afraid she might disappear. "I never stopped loving you," he confessed at last. Margaret didn't answer with words. She closed the distance herself, resting her forehead against his, breathing him in. 50 years of waiting narrowed into a single, fragile moment. When their lips finally met, it was slow, deliberate, carrying grief and forgiveness in equal measure. No urgency, no fear. Just two people choosing each other after a lifetime of almosts. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, indifferent to how long it had taken them to arrive here. Later, as they sat together watching the night settle in, Margaret rested her head on Thomas's shoulder. The future was uncertain. Time could not be undone. But love, she realized, did not need to arrive on schedule to be real. Thomas squeezed her hand, grounding himself in the present. For the first time since the war, he was no longer surviving. Was home.